I want you to try something for me. Close your eyes and imagine it's March 2035. I know that sounds crazy, but if you were to imagine it, what does your life look like? How does your day play out? Where do you live and who do you live with? And I think most importantly, how do you feel? These are just some of the questions that you would ask yourself if you were writing one of my favorite things. It's called a 10-year plan. And that's what I want to talk to you about on today's show. This is an exercise in visualization for designing the kind of life that you want. And let me tell you that if you're open to imagining how things could look, this is going to be so powerful for you. So let's get into it right after the break. Hey everyone, from LinkedIn News, I'm Leah Smart, and this is Everyday Better, a personal development podcast where every week I sit down with some of the world's brightest minds and bravest hearts who use science and story to share strategies for how we can flourish individually, in relationship to others, and to the world around us. Today I want to tell you about one of my favorite exercises for creating a long-term vision for yourself. It's also great for, of course, setting goals and planning. And it's called the 10-year plan. It was developed by the graphic designer Milton Glaser, and then it was popularized by writer, educator, and brand consultant Debbie Millman. Now, I'm sure that you have heard of a 5 or 10-year plan before. There are tons of versions of long-term planning tools like this out there. But I found that with some of those approaches, it feels really prescriptive. So it's like you're just list making, and they don't seem to bring much imagination in. For me, it's felt kind of stressful, not that exciting, and a little bit intimidating. So if that's the case for you, I understand why you may not have been compelled to do it thus far. This 10-year plan is different. The method is much more explorative and imaginative than most of the planning tools. And it's freeform, so it doesn't require you to know exactly how you're going to get from point A to point B in that very moment, which I love. For me, that is where the real value is and the power around a 10-year plan comes from. As a visualization tool, it puts you into a much more open place, and it asks you to consider what kind of person you could be or could become if you simply allowed yourself to explore the possibilities for your future self. And the reason I love exercises like this is that future self-work can help you shift how you behave in the present in service of your future self. A lot of us, I don't think, spend a whole bunch of time really considering ourselves beyond the year even. But in psychology, this term called prospection is a key skill for creating better perspective about what you really want and what you're going to do today to prepare for that. I was introduced to the 10-year plan a couple of years ago by my colleague, Jessie Hempel. And Jessie is the host of our sister podcast, which is called Hello Monday. And back in 2021, she had Debbie Millman on the show to actually talk about the 10-year plan concept. So I'd known about this tool for a few years before actually trying it for myself. Now, I will say I do really think that you need to be in the right mindset to do this. And for me, that moment came back in June of last year. So I had just gotten engaged, and I was in this place where I knew there was a lot of potential for my life to completely change. In fact, it definitely would. But the important part is that I was open to change and possibility during that period of time. However, I wanted to be the cause and not the effect of the direction my life went. And I think that is the perfect place to be writing out a 10-year plan. I was also at a point in my career where I felt like I needed a clearer vision of what I wanted. Before the role I'm in now, I had spent a few months wondering if I could ever carve out a spot for myself at LinkedIn where I could do work that felt the most meaningful to me, which I get to do now, hosting this podcast about the science of well-being. And for the first 1.5 years of my job, I was in the honeymoon phase. I was on cloud 9. But then, of course, like all of us do, I gradually settled back in. Side note, they call this hedonic adaptation. So my reality changed, right? The excitement started to dull and started to wear off. And once it did, I started looking into the future again and asking myself the question I find myself asking a lot. What's next? What am I aiming for? And where am I headed? Only now, I, for the first time in a really long time, had no idea. Now, I want to tell you that for someone like me, and this may be true for you too, that's really tough because by nature, I am a dreamer. I am always looking forward. I love thinking about possibilities. And when I realized I was having trouble coming up with a vision, I decided that I needed to give this 10-year plan a shot. If you're not someone who loves exercises like these, that is totally fine. I'm just going to ask you to come along with me and try it out. And here's why. Our mind sees in images, not in words. So you have to be able to paint a picture in order to create a vision. Now, if you think about athletes, I don't know if you've heard this, but many pro athletes, many professional musicians will practice in their minds before they go do something. They'll practice swinging the racket. They'll practice playing the keys. They'll practice looking at the music. And that supports them in actually showing up the day of and being successful. And so here's what I want to tell you. You have so much more agency than you think when it comes to creating a vision in your mind. It doesn't have to be passive. You can use activities like this and other visualizations to actively create a vision that you can see and bring up again and again for the direction that you want to go. All right, so let's get into it. And before we get started, you're going to need a pen and a piece of paper, or a couple pieces of paper. There are 2 parts to the 10-year plan. For part 1, I want you to write down in paragraph form what your ideal day looks like 10 years from today, from the moment that you wake up in the morning until you fall asleep that night. And I want you to really get into this. So describe all of the things that happen, all of the things that you do. Who are the people that you see throughout the day? What are the things that you eat? What are you wearing? How do you move from place to place? And I'm asking you to do this because I want you to sort of let yourself luxuriate into the details, but at the same time, you don't have to overthink anything too much. So this isn't about logic right now. It's just about you imagining a day. So go with your gut. And to help guide you, I want you to continually ask yourself the question, what's important to me when? So for example, what's important to me when I wake up in the morning? What do I want to be happening for me in the morning? So for me, it's getting an early start to the day, which means my 10-year plan, that first sentence is I wake up at 5:45 a.m. I'm one of those morning people. And the second sentence is I feel rested, not just because I don't love feeling tired in the morning, but because getting a good night's sleep is actually important to me. It's something I work hard on, and I invest a lot of energy into my sleep. So 10 years from today, I want to be getting my ideal amount of sleep, which is 7.5 hours. And I'm waking up feeling really refreshed. Okay, so I'm going to read some of mine to give you an example of what a 10-year plan can sound like. We live in Manhattan still, close to the water, somewhere between Midtown West and the Upper West Side. We're in a beautiful home that we love. It's a brownstone. And then I go on to correct myself and say, actually, is it an apartment? I don't really know. So it's okay to leave some cliffhangers in there, and you don't have to know everything. So just keep writing and trust the process. Know that at the very least, you're going to have a better sense for what you want by the end. And in this 10-year plan, I do know what the inside of my home should look like. I describe things like I want it to be light and spacious with enough room for myself and my family to be both together and apart, which is important to me. And the first thing I do after getting out of bed on my ideal day is walk to the kitchen to put coffee on. I do some reading, maybe a little bit of writing, but I'll be doing more of that later, I write. And then I make my way outside because we have outdoor space in my ideal future home. I sip coffee. I have 2 dogs who sleep next to me. I know that I feel really grateful. I feel really calm, and I feel warm. Later, once my husband, Tim, and our 2 kids, which we don't even have 2 kids yet, are awake and fed, I grab the dog, take them on a quick walk, and it's a gorgeous day outside. So I walk around the neighborhood feeling good and feeling hopeful. Now, I want to pause here to talk about the role of realism in this exercise. I know how much it costs to live in a brownstone in Midtown West or the Upper West Side. I know how much money my husband and I have to be making in order to afford a home with outdoor space anywhere in Manhattan. I get that these little details make for really lofty dreams, but that's kind of the point. That's the life I envision for myself. I also want to say not everyone is going to envision the same life. It doesn't all have to be lofty, and not every aspect of mine is. There's just a genuineness to the way that I'm writing this. And so the reason that I sit with this and I allow myself to dream a bit is that our brains, our minds have upper limits, right? We talk about that as being realistic. But the point of this exercise is to temporarily remove some of those upper limits, or at least raise them, right? So that you can actually think about what you desire. A lot of times when we limit ourselves to only what we dream is possible, we justify this by claiming realism. I'm just being realistic, right? But if I'm being real with you, I think realism when it comes to dreaming up the life, career, and all aspects of your experience in this life that you want is garbage. I think it's a cop-out to keep ourselves from disappointment. So when it comes to the 10-year plan, I'm going to tell you there is no room for your quote-unquote realism here. And I know that turning that part of your brain off is hard. When I let myself acknowledge what I really want is to live in a 4-bedroom brownstone in Manhattan, my mind immediately goes to down payments and cash offers and fighting with other buyers and mortgages and all the other stressful and potentially prohibitive roadblocks to making that dream a reality or even having it in the first place. But then I just relax and remind myself that I can choose to ignore those thoughts, but also that I have proof of times when I have not been able to see how I could get somewhere, and I did anyway. So maybe in this instance, I am setting myself up for disappointment. But if that fear is strong enough to keep me from going down the road in the first place, then I'll never know what could have happened. So writing out your ideal day in detail from start to finish is the first part of the 10-year plan. After the break, I'll explain how the second part works, and I'll share a bit more of my own. We'll be back in just a few minutes. So, after you've finished writing out your ideal day, take a beat. Go to lunch, go for a walk, call a friend, whatever. Just put some distance between yourself and the plan you've just written. And then, soon after, and when you're ready, come back to it. Now we're going to work on the second part of the 10-year plan. And that involves making a list of what must be true in order for your ideal day to happen. So for those of you who love practicality, I get you, I see you. So this is your opportunity to get a little more concrete and a bit more prescriptive in your planning. So I'll share an example. For me, I would need to buy a home. It's the home that I said I want to wake up in on my ideal day 10 years from now. In my 10-year plan, I wrote that I go for a swim. Right now, I'm an okay swimmer, but in 10 years, what has to be true is that I'm a really strong swimmer. I also wrote that I want to be able to teach a yoga class in my ideal day, which means I have to be a certified yoga instructor in 10 years. This list isn't about how, it's about what needs to be true in order for your 10-year plan to come to fruition. Okay, and then there's actually one more third and final step to this 10-year plan, and it's pretty simple. That's rereading your plan on an annual basis. Now, Debbie Millman talks about the power of this in her interview with Jesse and admits that, yes, it might sound a little bit magical, but it actually works. She also attested to how many students come back to tell her their 10-year plan came to fruition. Now, sometimes it's not in 10 years, maybe it's 11 or 12, but it happened. So rereading your 10-year plan is important for a couple of reasons. Number one, it gives you an opportunity to measure your progress and acknowledge any milestones you've hit, which means identifying and celebrating your small wins, and that's really important in personal development work. Number two, by reviewing your 10-year plan, you can clearly see how your dreams and goals shift over time. And this is important because I think it's common that when you realize you want something, you assume that from that point forward, that's what you'll want without question. And so oftentimes we don't check in with ourselves about whether that's still the case. We don't actually interrogate our desires, and that can lead us to make choices later on that leave us feeling unfulfilled. Here's an example from my own life. So in 2017, I learned about the Masters of Applied Positive Psychology program at UPenn, and I decided it was something I really wanted to do. And last year, I finally applied after 4 years of doubting whether I would be able to balance the coursework alongside my full-time job and whether it was really worth the investment. So when I found out I'd been accepted into the program in April, I was ecstatic until I wasn't. Suddenly, I wasn't so sure that getting my master's in applied positive psychology was the right thing for me anymore, or that it was the right time. But I had wanted it for so long, so I felt stuck for over a month in this place of confusion. And this confusion highlighted for me that I really wasn't clear what direction I wanted to head. And that is when I knew, along with everything else, that it was time to try the 10-year plan. In the process of writing, I realized that for me, right now, going to Penn and getting my master's was an expired dream. It's something I can pick up later, but for now, I needed to let it go and I turned down the offer. Now, it doesn't mean I won't ever consider another master's program, including Penn, because I love it, but I'm also allowing for the dream to have dispersed and also to crystallize again before I start moving towards something new. One more thing before we go. Earlier, I said that one of the things I love about the 10-year plan is you don't have to know how you're going to get from point A to point B in order to paint a picture of your ideal future. So you can put your dreams out there without knowing exactly how they're going to happen. The 10-year plan sets the wheels in motion, and it allows for the messy, meandering paths that we take, all the speed bumps that we hit, all the roundabouts and the back and forth, the 2 steps forward and 1 step back-ness that defines life and human growth. You design your 10-year plan, but that doesn't mean you have control over exactly how it unfolds. The challenge for each of us is to, yes, dream big and see what happens. Everyday Better is a production of LinkedIn News. The show is produced by Grace Rubin and Emily Reeves. Asaf Gadron is our sound engineer. He makes sure we sound good in the studio. Tim Boland mixed our show. Sarah Storm is our senior producer. Dave Pond is head of news production. Maya Pope-Chappelle is the director of content and audience development. Courtney Koop is head of LinkedIn original audio and video. Dan Roth is the editor-in-chief of LinkedIn. And I'm Leah Smart. Thanks for coming with me, and I'll see you next week.